Access big savings every day, all in the Kroger app.
Get fresh Purdue boneless chicken breasts for $3.49 a pound. Then find low prices on thousands of items like sparkling ice water, Kroger brand chips, and more, all with your card.
Shop these deals at your local Kroger, less than 5 miles away. Or tap the screen now to download the Kroger app to save big today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Prices and product availability subject to change. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
With
your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome to Heard Tell. Okay, we got to get to Washington. We're going to get all up inside of Washington. When we do that, you need a Washington insider. It's not as bad as it sounds, I promise. Eric Garcia, he is the head DC man for Congress and the Washington Bureau. He has some fancy title that I'm not going to get into right now. Eric Garcia, buddy for The Independent. How are you, sir?
Good to be here.
I want to start with some pneumatics because Trump is dominating coverage. We knew he would do that.
Yes.
His buddies like Elon Musk are moving fast and breaking stuff because we knew they were going to do that. And a lot of people are like, well, why isn't Congress doing anything? But you need to explain this. They see Senate hearings. They saw the Lake and Raleigh thing go through. They saw the inauguration. Go through the calendar, though, because Congress actually isn't in session. They actually come back tomorrow as we're recording this. So Congress and the Senate aren't actually working right now. They're working on TV. They're working in hearings. They're not actually doing the work they normally do, and that's part of the story of why Trump and his team are moving so fast right now, right?
Absolutely. I mean, right now what you're seeing is the House wasn't even in session last week. So the Senate was in session. They did a lot of confirmation hearings. They had a lot of confirmation votes. And right now the big thing is it's just getting Trump his nominees. That's the priority of Senate Majority Leader John Thune. Speaker Johnson and the House Republicans, they had their retreat last week, I believe. Not this past weekend, but the weekend prior, for their policy summit huddle at Trump Doral down in Miami. So yeah, they're really, people are saying, oh, why isn't Congress doing anything right now? It's because, Democrats don't have, people are like, why aren't Democrats doing anything? It's because, well, they don't have any power to do anything. They can't gavel in a session. They can't demand everybody come back into Washington right now.
And part of that story, though, is you're talking about, we see the top line ones, and we're going to get into like RFK and some of these other ones in a minute. The staffers for the congressional folks, they've got to settle in as well. The Congress people, they've got a lot of new people they got to bring in. Congress itself turns over somewhere between 50 to 100 Congress people every cycle, no matter what. They've got to get them all settled in. So 1st of February is actually when business starts getting done traditionally. It's just the noise of the news cycle makes this one look even worse.
Yeah, I mean, take into account, I think that there are 8 new senators, not counting the 2 appointees, the 2 senators who filled vacancies. You had a huge turnover this last election, both for Democrats and Republicans, to say nothing of the seats that Republicans flipped in the Senate, the seats that Democrats flipped in the House. There's just been a huge turnover, and it's just getting everybody. It's been getting people on committee assignments, getting people, in the House and the Senate, reorganizing the committees. In the House, they're the ones that people are elected to the committees, and then there are the select committees where it's at the discretion of the Speaker and the Minority Leader, things like the Intelligence Committee. So really, it's been about, to your point, yes, it's been about organizing the friggin' thing more than anything right now.
And something else, because you cover it, I just want to explain it to folks who aren't familiar with it. There is a relationship between the White House and Congress, but in the news coverage, it gets conflated a lot. One of the underreported stories, I actually did some of the Fox 5 DC inauguration coverage. One of the things that got covered locally but didn't get covered nationally was during the inauguration. They're still on the dais. You saw those buses going into the West Wing with the staffers ready to go literally the moment Trump took off.
Yes.
That was not accidental. The West Wing works separately from Congress. So a lot of the headlines you're seeing, the Elon Musk stuff, the Doge stuff, the OPM stuff, the tariff stuff, that's all been going because that all comes from the West Wing, and Congress hasn't had a chance to react to it, as a better way to explain it. Is that a fair way to lay out? Because that doesn't get covered, but that's a big part of the story.
It absolutely is, though. This is what the transition is about, and take into account that Trump is actually, and ironically, to your point, Trump is actually behind in hiring people. I think that last we checked, they were like they'd only hired like a quarter of the people. Our White House correspondent Andrew Feinberg had reported that they'd only got like a quarter of the people they need. But you're right, they had a lot of these staffers ready to go to begin, whereas the House is chaos and the Senate works famously on a French working week. So you're right. Yeah, the reason why you're only seeing a reaction now is because the White House was getting ready for this transition, and Congress was still just opening up the doors.
Yeah, Eric Garcia, congressional reporter. Take us in the halls real quick, though, because you had new people coming and going. The Senate hearings are dominating everything because there's, let's call it what it is. It's a lot of very online famous people getting nominated, so it's kind of the perfect storm for coverage. Inside of the Senate and the House, where you work, where you run into the hallways, where you talk to these people, what's the flavor of it been? Because it looks like chaos, and even the Congress people are saying, yeah, it's a lot of chaos, but it's always Congress. Just kind of put it in perspective, because this is what, your fifth or sixth Congress since you really started covering it like this. You've done this a few times. How's it compare?
A lot of people, I talk with a lot of our younger reporters. I'm like, yes, this is, and it was funny, I was talking with an older reporter who's been there for decades. And I said, yeah, this is a lot like 2017, except even more. And then one of the older reporters said, actually, it's very similar to it's the chaos of the first Trump presidency with the velocity of the first Obama inauguration, which was, you have to remember, that was during the Great Recession. They had to do a lot of stuff just to get the bird off the ground. So it is that kind of frenetic pace. And I think the thing that I would say is that Republicans have a lot of stuff they want to do independently of Donald Trump, specifically the House and particularly the Senate when it comes to these reconciliation bills. And for those who don't know, reconciliation bills are bills where they can basically pass anything with only 51 votes, as long as it's relevant to the budget. Democrats did it twice last time during Biden's presidency. Republicans did it a lot. It's something, because of the filibuster, it's now the default only way you can pass something. So they're trying to lay down the bricks very carefully and keep everybody happy. And so that's what it's important to remember. Realize that's the context of that's what's going on in the background amid all of these confirmation hearings, amid the spending freeze pause, amid the attacks on USAID, amid the tariffs, amid everything.
Now, let's pause right there because there's something we need to explain. You're an insider. You can explain it. We're going to hear reconciliation a lot. That's a term that we've gotten familiar with if you follow Congress. However, there's an important piece to reconciliation that you cover that folks need to understand. They can't just reconcile anything. They have to have bills passed in both Congress and the Senate. And then I'm really bastardizing this, just make it as simple as possible. You have to have two passed bills and then you reconcile the two bills together. Just explain that process, because that's like step 8 of a multi-step process, but it's being pitched like, oh, well, reconciliation's a workaround. Well, it's kind of a workaround, but you still have to do legislation to get to the workaround part, right?
Yeah, you still have to pass. So first and foremost, we should take into account the Congress didn't even pass a budget last year. They let it was the Democrats and the Republicans both hoped that the election would go their way. So they kind of kicked the can down the road and they passed a continuing resolution just to keep the lights on. And then they first need to pass a budget to do that. And then they had to pass a budget reconciliation resolution on top of that to reconcile for reconciliation. Then they had to do this thing called a vote-a-rama. Then they actually can start working on the actual bills. Then they actually have the votes on the actual legislation. This is a multi-step process. And on top of that, as you said, they can't pass anything through reconciliation. It has to be germane to the budget. And, you're a West Virginia, you know this name very well, Robert Byrd. famously had, created the criteria for what could pass the reconciliation. Excuse me. It has to be that there are all of these steps. It's called the bird bath. And it has to go through this strict process to include everything, to fit all these certain criteria to be included into the resolution. Democrats tried putting in a lot of stuff into their budget reconciliation resolutions that just couldn't get through. And whether it was immigration reform, whether it was including a minimum wage increase, whether it was capping insulin, and it just didn't go through. And I think that Republicans are in for a rude awakening about what's going to be able to pass in their reconciliation bills.
So when we do all this stuff, the background on this, you just kind of touched on it, but I think it's important to set the stage. The continuing resolutions and the budget battle and the debt limit, all that got punted to this session coming up. They got to start dealing with it now, but basically the deadline's March something. When that happened, a lot of people, that raised eyebrows for folks like us who actually follow this, is like, why would you want to deal with that 60 days into the first term of a presidency, of a lame duck presidency with a narrow majority? But that's what they decided to do it. So there was a lot of speculation. We all thought, well, that's putting a grenade in your back pocket for later. We'll see how it goes. Now it's here. They're already having to have these discussions about it. Is it the problem they think it's going to be? Do they think they can get it through? Because they've got this whole agenda package they want to do, and in the middle of it, they got to go back and clean up last year. Is that a way to lay it out?
That is absolutely a way to lay it out. And right now, the big debate right now is whether they want to do one or two bills in reconciliation. And this. So like right now, there's talk. They want to include everything from oil drilling in the Arctic to increase money for border security to, and then they want to extend the tax cuts that Trump passed during his first presidency, because a lot of them expire later this year. And so there's a big question about whether you pass all of that in one bill. Trump was talking about he wants one big beautiful bill, and then but then there's also talk about, well, they can only give the president an immediate win. And like you said, on top of that, they still had to deal with the debt limit, which was a deal brokered by Kevin McCarthy and his and the two guys who brokered the deal for Republicans are both out of Congress, to say nothing of Kevin McCarthy, and the White House is not there. It's a different White House now. So they still have to deal with the debt limit on top of that.
Now, once we do the debt limit and they're talking about the one big beautiful bill, that's not going to happen. We know it's going to get broke up because there's just the way the Senate works, just the logistics of it. That's not going to happen. Folks like me who just talking head for a living, not much of one, but a living. One of the things we've been saying is, like, no matter how popular Trump is, no matter how loud he is, this is still a lame duck presidency. Even with J.D. Vance waiting in the wings, it's a lame duck presidency.
Yes.
I've been saying this is a narrow window. I think the CR and the budget makes it an even more narrow window than normal. I think all the other stuff with Trump makes it even more narrow because you burn through a lot of goodwill a lot faster than you normally would. The Congress people are talking about this. Johnson got caught kind of halfway alluding to it's like, well, we've only got a couple of weeks, not a couple of months. I'm paraphrasing, but you get what I'm saying. Johnson's talked about this. Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic opposition leadership, has said basically the same thing. He's like, we're really fighting over the next few weeks, not the whole Congress, because once you get to August, everybody's running for their next term. That's just the fact of it.
Yes.
What do the Congress people say the window is here? Because if you start trying to do all this reconciliation at the same time you do the CR, there's just not enough bandwidth in the congressional rules to do both at once. I think that's what they're talking about, right? Talk us through it, because the news media coverage isn't matching what the people in Congress are actually saying to each other. Both parties, both sides are saying basically the same thing timeline-wise. Tell us about that timeline, because that's really the key to this whole thing.
Right. I mean, so taking into account, I wrote this on Friday. Every president has a honeymoon session. Has a honeymoon period. If you remember Barack Obama, when he came into office, he had something like a 78% approval rating. Joe Biden came in with like a 61% approval rating. That the amount of leverage, and Trump came in, I think, with like a 47% approval rating, which is lower than a normal incumbent president, than a normal president does, as I just displayed by those numbers. But because of the velocity, so Obama's approval rating dipped like around early fall of 2009, because people were still hurting from the Great Recession and because of the bloodbath over healthcare. Biden's approval rating nosedived in around August of 2021 because of Afghanistan. Because of the sheer velocity and the sheer rapid fire speed at which these are, his administration is doing. They're burning through a lot of goodwill. And as he said, like the reason why a lot of Republicans say they want to do one bill is because they know they're on a limited time window. And I think a lot of Democrats recognize that they have only a few weeks after they've been after they've been moping around for the past 2 months, they only have a few weeks to get their act together and create some kind of opposition, or when it comes to the debt limit, have some kind of ask for the Republicans to keep the government to help the government keep paying its bills.
Yeah, Eric Garcia, the Independent, he wrote that piece. We'll link to it. And another piece he wrote about is the chaos thing. I don't want to go point by point through it because we're getting fire hosed with all the Trump actions. Overall, and this isn't even a criticism, this is just how he is.
Yes.
Trump's leadership style is a chaotic leadership style. This is a thing if you go to business school or you go to, a nice place like UNC Chapel Hill, like you did, that I couldn't even afford to walk around at when I was a kid and didn't have the grades to, frankly. Look, chaos leadership works in certain ways, but what you do is you create chaos around you. You become the center point, and then everybody filters everything back to you, and you become the calm of the storm, and then you can take credit for the status quo and so forth. That's not a Trump specific thing. That's a known leadership style, but that's how Trump leads. So now we're seeing it. All the tariff stuff that's going on right now, all the threats to aid. We've got the Elon thing, which we'll talk about later, which I think is the greatest scandal of my lifetime, but we'll get to that in a minute. He creates chaos, and then he negotiates so that whatever the solution is his credit. That's what he's doing. Now, that works for some things, and everybody's like, well, it's all negotiating tactics. Well, the problem with negotiations is, even if you negotiate and get what you want, if you really tick off the other person, there's going to be ramifications down the line. You already wrote about it. We're already seeing the ripple effects of the chaos theory of leadership starting. Where do you think that goes? Because that has a great effect to Congress, because power is perception. And if they perceive that the chaos is starting to affect them electorally going into the midterms, which it's going to, there's going to be an end date on some of this stuff, or at least a little bit of pushback.
Absolutely. I mean, you look no further. I mean, I think it's hard to, I have a bunch of friends in Canada, and the amount of fury that Canada is feeling right now, and anger. If you look at the news stories on almost every website in Canada, it's all stories about the tariffs. You mentioned some of the other things. Last week he picked a fight with Colombia, with Gustavo Petro, and Petro is his own guy. We could talk about him later, but that kind of tangle and back and forth that he had, where he kind of shoved sending migrants on military planes down his throat, and then kind of claimed credit afterward. And then Petro's government said, oh, no, wait, we're going to go to Washington. It creates an environment where people don't feel like they can trust him, or they don't feel like he's somebody who could keep his word. And in the same way, in the same token, if, so Canada, of course, said that they're going to start doing tariffs specifically on products from red states. That is going to cause a lot of hurt for a lot of Republicans in places like North Carolina, or places like Iowa, or places like Georgia, places that Republicans need to actually do well if they want to have any kind of chance of holding on to the White House after Trump leaves the White House, or even holding the House and the Senate. So,
as you know, I have a commentator and consulting gig with the News Forum up in Canada. That's a national news network. Real quick background. Canada only had the CBC for years and years and years. They were only allowed to have independent news sources in the last few years or so. And I work with, an upstart national news network up there. So I talk to them all the time because I work with them. I do hits for them. And the way it got explained to me this morning by one of the people I work with up there is like, this is like COVID level anger, but more. So we
Yes.
have the viral videos of them chanting, booing the national anthem at hockey games and all this. For the American folks, and especially the MAGA wing keyboard warriors that are just like F Canada, let me break this down really quickly for you. Canada supplies 61% of our crude oil. Canada is one of 3 nations on the earth that can jump our gas prices at the pump pretty much anytime they want to do it. And they're going to do it probably today or tomorrow. Now, again, this is Trump negotiating because the other part of this, you cover Congress, the USMCA comes up for review by statute this year. They have to negotiate. That's why he's picking on Canada and Mexico. But Trump was elected in large part, in my opinion, you tell me yours. Joe Biden lost the ability to form coherent sentences in public. That's number one.
Yes.
Number 2 was people are ticked off about consumer prices.
Yes.
Well, number 1 got solved. That's gone. Consumer prices, Trump himself is saying there's going to be pain on the front end of this. Egg prices are going up no matter what because of avian flu. Nobody can control that. I'm not going to bash Trump for that.
No.
Gas prices is something that kills presidencies dead, and Trump picking fights with Canada is going to raise gas prices, at least temporarily. Congressional people feel that because they got the midterm before the regular general election. That's something they're going to pay attention to, right? And it's something that doesn't get covered, but Canada's our main crude oil importer. It's fun to pick fights until, this stuff starts hurting the people, right?
Yeah, I mean, look no further than Senator John Cornyn. He's up for re-election in Texas in 2026.
Stay with a little bit of oil, if I recall correctly.
And stay with a lot of oil, and a lot of the refineries process the oil that comes from Canada. The energy industry in Houston is massive, and a lot of his campaign cash comes from oil. So yeah, that absolutely is going to be a thing. I mean, look no further than places like Georgia. Senator John Ossoff is up for re-election. He could absolutely just point to gas prices paying at the pump when he's up for re-election. And I think he's in a good spot unless Brian Kemp actually jumps in, which is very possible. But I think Brian Kemp's going to run for the big one. This is absolutely something that there can be a direct pointing the finger to. And as he said, right now Trump's doing this. He's trying to be tough guy with Canada and Mexico. But and on top of that, let's not mince words here. The tariff thing when it comes to Mexico, it could very easily lead to President Sheinbaum just completely nuking Trump's plans for immigration and saying, no, Mr. President, we're not going to accept these people who you deport, or we're just going to outright let people come across the border. And that was you mentioned reason number 1, Joe Biden couldn't, his brain was mush. And number 2, prices were high. Number 3 was the border was overrun. And if President Sheinbaum says that he can't, just allows people to come across the border, that creates an even bigger border crisis.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be backlash to it, but look, you have to work with people, especially neighbors. Mexico, Canada, China, that's 47% of all our trade.
Yes.
Now,
correct.
China's a different thing because that's a hostile foreign government. Mexico's got their issues, but they're not hostile to us. Canada's getting ready to have a leadership change. That's one of the reasons Trump's putting so much pressure on them right now.
Yeah.
We need to have a better discussion in our country about our neighbors and how trade works. People don't understand how trade works. It's a complicated issue.
Yeah.
But, last night, Trump's talking about the UK. He's talking about the EU. These are important trade partners in different ways, not as big. Is it a worldview and communication problem that people don't understand it? Like, people are never going to get into the nitty-gritty details of this. No. But you're a member of the media, so you're guilty too. I am too.
I have to.
Do we cover this stuff correctly? Because part of the thing with Trump is it's all reactionary, and you don't cover why a tariff is bad. Tariffs are bad. Well, Trump says it's good. So now it's just Trump said it's good, bad, and it falls right back into the Trump stuff, right? Instead of this guy like, no, America has a long history, good and bad, with tariffs. We have a lot of historical precedents on this. We don't cover this stuff really well, do we?
We don't. I mean, now you're speaking my language. My first ever my second job in Washington was covering finance and the economy and trade when there was talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which got nuked right before Trump became president. And the thing that people don't recognize is that when the United States does these tariffs or pulls out of these trade deals, especially with the rise of other global economic superpowers. This allows for China to have more influence. That's one reason why pulling out of the WHO actually increases China's leverage, for as much as Trump talks about COVID being the China virus. They're absolutely, you're right. We don't do a good job of actually saying what a tariff does and why a tariff not only affects the price of imports, but it also affects the prices of products that are made in the United States. Because now they basically, if American manufacturers had to sell more, sell at a higher price, they're not going to start selling to Americans at a lower price. They're not going to start selling to American distributors at a lower price. They're going to, that increases, that just makes everything more expensive across the board.
Yeah, Eric Garcia, you're in Washington. I'm going to talk about one other congressional thing real quick. The terrible plane crash tragedy and hitting the Black Hawk. Look, my background is actually in transportation before I started doing all this other stuff, so I know a little bit about this stuff. Air transportation specifically was my core competency in the military. Yeah. This is a congressional story, and people don't understand that, but I'm an av geek and I cover this, and you're inside Washington, so you understand this. DCA has been a political hot potato for Congress for decades now, especially after 9/11, because remember, one of the 9/11 recommendations was to shut it down because they're like, people are old enough to remember they actually wanted to close it. And there was a lot of reasons not to. And I'm not picking, this did not cause the crash. This is background information. So understand really clearly what I'm saying here. The reason you have direct flights from places like Wichita into DCA when it's pulling teeth to get in is because the U.S. Senator said it. He said it at the press conference. He's like, this is the flight I take. That's why you have these kind of flights in the DCA. Now, I'm somebody who has advocated, like, no, DCA needs direct flights, not just for senators and Congress people, although that's how it gets done. It's good for the American people to be able to get in and out of there. So on one hand, I do that. However, new information means you need to stop and reevaluate it. Is there going to be an honest discussion about DCA and the problems it has? Just go look at a Google map and you'll see why it's a problem. Why DCA is a problem. Congress is never going to let it go because they want those direct flights and the quick trip across the bridge. Where's this going to go forward? Because they're going to quit covering it. But in Washington, this is every year this is a discussion. This is always a debate in Washington. What do we do with DCA? Are we going to get anything positive out of this crash as far as this, or is it just going to be business as usual as soon as people forget about the terrible tragedy and loss of human life?
I wish I could say that there was going to be that there will be something positive, but just take into account that Congress just reauthorized the FAA bill last year. And, to the point is that it actually increased the number of flights. Now, those flights don't go into effect, I think, until March, the ones that were in the FAA bill. But this is a bipartisan thing because Senator Ted Cruz was the top Republican. Believe it or not, Ted Cruz actually had to pass a bill and actually had to be responsible and not just grandstand. He wanted more flights direct out of DCA because there's a lot of airlines, airline companies in Texas. And Raphael Warnock, a Democrat, obviously Delta is based in Georgia. But this, you're right. The DC, Maryland, Virginia delegation has been warning about this for a long time. And as you said, plenty of senators, they don't want to go you have to take into account, it's like a 15-minute car ride from the Capitol to DCA. It is the thing that, when they are done with votes, when Congress is done with votes, there are usually cars out in front of the Capitol to take people to DCA. This is going to be one of those things that senators are going to need to answer for. Now, there could be an oversight investigation. Like, as you said, there was a whole report after 9/11 said about DCA saying, look, we need to shut this airport down because it's not good for security. There'll be commissions, but whether or not the Senate actually wants to give up its own personal comfort is a whole other question, and I'm not that optimistic.
I know the answer to the senators giving up their comfort right now unless people make them do it. There's another part of this that has a government angle outside of the investigation into what actually happened, and the DEI stuff is burying it. But you've covered this before, and I'm an av geek, so let's just go ahead and get into it because I think people need to be reminded of. If the Trump administration wanted to do something about air traffic controllers, they've got a sitting lawsuit they could settle right now. The Biden administration should have settled it. This goes all the way back to the Obama administration. I'm sorry, folks on the left, you're going to have to eat this one because Obama's administration was wrong about this one. They actually did have a problem with trying to force people into air traffic control positions, but this was during the Obama administration. There's been a lawsuit sitting since then. They could settle it at any time and repair that relationship with professional air traffic control folks and fix some of this stuff. Everybody's yelling DEI and missing that this is actually something that's been lingering for, 15 years now?
It's been lingering for 15 years now. There was actually a shortage. There's actually a shortage. I think there's a shortage of like 3,000, something like 3,000 air traffic controllers. The most recent FAA bill that I mentioned last year, it actually appropriated more money for air traffic controllers. You're right. The Trump administration could easily settle this lawsuit, and it's a way for them to stick the middle finger over to Barack Obama. It's an easy win, but again, that takes actual work. And again, the problem is that, and you know this because you're an av geek, morale with air traffic control was already low before COVID. COVID made it nosedive. And then there's been staffing issues. They're often overworked. There are people doing the jobs of two people. There's one person doing jobs for every two people. This is especially true for major airports like DCA, Chicago, LAX, Houston. This is a widespread problem, and there actually are concrete things that can be done. Increasing pay for air traffic controllers, doing better hiring, better hiring practices, better recruitment. As you said, settling this lawsuit. There are plenty of things that can be done, but nobody wants to do them. They want to just blame DEI.
Yeah, and the problem with air traffic controllers, and somebody that had a private pilot background, just talking to those, look, there's only so many people on the planet that can do that job. Because you have to be a certain psychology, you have to have a certain skill set. You can train people up, but you really have to have a certain mental build to do ATC and do it correctly. There's only so many of those people, so you have to take care of them. You got to pay them well. You actually have to go out and cultivate and recruit the people that have the mindset to do that, because it's so much more mental than just a physical skill set. There's that part of it. One more part about this air crash, because you travel in and out of DC all the time. So the time. Anybody that's been to DC, they see the helicopters and they're always low and they're everywhere, and they're all government or military, because that's the only people that are allowed to fly in there. One of my pet peeves for quite a while, and this doesn't directly relate to it, but it's a good time to bring it up. You just mentioned all the cars out front of Congress. I did presidential support from Clinton on up. All right. I remember I physically handled the Clinton motorcade. All right.
Yeah.
It was about 6-7 vehicles.
Yes.
Clinton's, the president.
Yes.
Trump's is 25 to 30 cars all the time. Now we have the undersecretary for bottle washing and underwater basket weaving gets 3 Suburbans and a police escort just to go down from DuPont to, wherever they're going to do their speech. There is a proliferation in VIP escorted traffic in DC that, in my opinion, and nobody wants to listen to little old me, but I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute, gotten grossly out of hand. I'm all for diplomats and stuff having it, but this stuff has really gotten nuts as far as VIP transport, who does and doesn't get helicopters, who does and does get in airplanes. It's exploded. It's undeniable that it's exploded. More and more people get it. I understand this is just government creep and everybody wants their little power thing, but this is a problem.
No, I completely agree with you. I'll give you an example. You know this. I've done pooling. I've done the travel pool. I did the travel pool for the vice president last year. I was in Detroit. And for those who don't know, that there's this thing called a travel pool where a handful of reporters travel with the president, the vice president, the first lady, whatever. And we were in a van. I want to say like 5 or 6 cars behind the behind the vice president, behind the principal, and the entire. It was great because like the roads were complete, the freeways were completely cleared off in Detroit, of all places. And anybody who's been in traffic in Detroit knows how big of a deal that is. But you're right. Like the amount of security. I mean, look, I during the inauguration, I was looking at the amount of vehicles, the amount of black cars that are there for the president, the vice president elect, and the president elect was unreal. And there's even more, as you said. Now there's Secretary of State has one, to say nothing. I mean, anybody who remembers the EPA director, during Trump's last detail, he would literally have a security detail, Scott Pruitt, a security detail to go to the restaurants. So everybody wants their slice now.
Eric Garcia, Independent. I want to talk about RFK Jr. for a second. I'm well on the record on what kind of a bad human being I am, but I want to take it from the angle that you wrote about it. And you wrote one book on autism. You got another one coming out this year or next year. It's this year, right? We're
next year. Yeah.
Comes out next year now. Look, this is your bailiwick. You've covered this not just as somebody that has it, but somebody who's a professional that deals with it and talks about it with other people. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
RFK Jr. is a hard line for a lot of medical people, for a lot of disabled people, for a lot of autistic people, for a lot of vaccine people. Just talk about it, because both as somebody that covered it and somebody's got a personal problem with how he's conducted himself. Why do y'all view him so differently? Because I get a lot of like, well, why can't you stand this guy? And I'm like, because I can read. But most people don't do that. They just see the press stuff. They're only getting media that they want to hear. Just kind of lay it out why this is so different. And part of it's his name and part of it's who he is, but there's decades of this stuff with him. It's not a new thing.
It's not a new thing whatsoever. And the point that I'm trying to make is that, look, RFK Jr., there was, the anti-vaccine movement in the 90s and the 2000s was a big thing, but like people don't recognize that having a Kennedy, particularly someone like RFK Jr., who, to his credit, had a very vaunted career as an environmental lawyer before he went down this hole, and actually did a lot of things with cleaning up the Hudson River. But to have him promote this idea gave authority and gave credence. And the reason why I guess I have such a beef with it is that in the 90s, and we talked about this when my first book came out, the 90s and the 2000s were such an opportunity, an incredible opportunity, because what you had a large number of autistic people who otherwise weren't getting diagnosed, or who were who otherwise didn't get diagnosed, were getting diagnosed. We were seeing a lot of people getting out of institutions, so autism was becoming a lot more visible. There was an opportunity to do something. And then we had just gotten over the urban legend and the myth that unloving parents caused autism. And there was an opportunity to get something right and get it done right in the quote unquote right way. And what RFK Jr. and Jenny McCarthy and Jim Carrey and all these anti-vax folks did is they tossed it out the window, and we wasted so much time and wasted, focusing on the vaccine thing and spreading fear among parents and scaring the bejesus out of them and giving them someone to blame, instead of focusing on, okay, how do we make things more adaptable and more accessible for autistic people. And, we've only recently started to turn a corner where the federal government listens to autistic people about the needs that they have. And a lot of people say, whenever I talk about, I say autistic people don't want to care. They don't want, they just want better lives. A lot of people think that I say that means that I think everything about autism is wonderful. Not everything about autism is wonderful. There's a lot of people have meltdowns. Nobody wants a meltdown. They're horrible. But a lot of the autism community wants more research into why heart disease is such a big killer of autistic people. A lot of autistic, there isn't enough, another example that I give is there isn't enough research into why so many autistic women specifically have eating disorders. We don't do enough research into why suicide is the second biggest killer of autism for autistic people without intellectual disabilities, and seizures are one of the biggest killers of autistic people with intellectual disabilities. So the point that I'm making is that by Kennedy having this platform, by him having this, he will be giving credence to this debunked idea. And also it'll be rolling back the clock because we don't know. He said he wants to put a pause to a lot of the research at the NIH. We don't know what's going to be done. So I'll give you an example. Last year, President Biden signed a reauthorization of the Autism Cares Act, which was previously the Combating Autism Act. And, now that means that President Trump is going to, could have the authority to appoint people onto the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee. It could very easily be some cranks or conspiracy theorists. So, or we don't even, I can't recall if Biden actually appointed any people, but there is a real chance that we roll back the clock and we actively harm people with disabilities.
We're having this debate about people with disabilities getting assistance from the government, whether it's monetarily or just, preferential treatment and all this, and it getting rolled into the DEI stuff when it's actually two separate things. I keep seeing people conflate those two things, and it's like, no, stop. Yeah. It's horrible. Let's just be real, because we've been friends long enough. I edit you when you're on this program. So I could go in Adobe and make you the second coming of Cicero, where you're just the best speaker ever. I could take out every little glyph, stutter, I can make it perfect, right? I've done it. I'll be sitting and editing you no, wait a minute. I don't want to make this too clean because now it's not Eric anymore. Yeah. Or it's somebody else. Just take an example like that, because you've talked about it, having to learn how to do TV, having to learn to write, how to do that stuff. It's part of giving access to people with things like autism or a physical disability or another mental disability. But it also brings the uniqueness that we miss in the creator commentary, content creator world we live in now, where there's a whole lot of sameness because everybody does everything. But the good part of content creator stuff is people like us can just get in front of a mic and start doing it. That's something I think that we need to lay out and talk about, because I've caught myself editing you no, wait a minute. I can't make it too clean because now it's not Eric anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the beauties of content creation, for all of the downsides, and Lord knows there are plenty of them. One of the things that's great is that we were able to now have content creators. It's one of the ways that I've been able to communicate for my newest book with non-speaking autistic people or autistic people with intellectual disabilities. It's actually a way, now with captioning, there are actually better ways of making it so that even if they're communicating in a way that other people don't understand, with the captioning, they can actually communicate and so that other people can understand. It lowers the barrier to entry in ways that we otherwise previously wouldn't have had. And I think that is absolutely a plus side. And I think that's absolutely, put it that. I think that's absolutely a net plus, because it enables us to hear and get the input of people who otherwise have been ignored. And instead of us talking over people and saying what's best for them, we're actually able to listen and to listen to and hear people say what they actually need and want.
See, I think it's a good thing that we have people that are different background. One of the problems with me, look, one of the reasons I get the media opportunities I get into is I've had meeting after meeting after meeting of people like, well, you're different because, you don't talk the same and, you have a different perspective. Yeah. Well, yeah, because so many people, no offense to anybody, everybody in media, they went to 4-year colleges and they all had the same internships and they all hang out in the same clubs. And I didn't do any of that because I was a failure when I went to college the first time. So I have a different life experience. So it gives me a different perspective. Sure. If I've got people at publications and outlets saying that to me, it's like, well, okay, but there's all these other people like this that are just sitting there waiting for a chance. Why don't you go find them instead of just stumbling onto me? I think people talk about, look, there's valid criticisms of news media and there's invalid. I think a valid one is it's a lot of sameness and a lot of groupthink, and I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's just the nature of the machine is when you go in that machine, you come out looking like the cogs in the machine made you look, right? I think, to put it salely, there's a real easy way for some of the media to kind of fix their perception problem. It's just bringing in these different voices and having a little bit of a variety.
No question, absolutely. That's the big way. And again, it's not a conspiracy. You're just prone to want to hire somebody who went to the same school as you. You're prone to want to promote the voices of somebody who you knew. So it's not a desire to lock people out. It's just a lack of curiosity. And I think one of the things that we should always have is we should always aspire to be much more curious and much more open-minded. And more willing to listen to other people who don't sound like us and talk like us,
Yeah. Eric Garcia, congressional reporter from The Independent. I want to talk about the Senate for just a minute while I got you, though. You just mentioned Ossoff in Georgia. That's going to be one of the premier races in the midterms coming up. Another one, and it's been all over, and we already talked about it, but I want to talk about it publicly. Tom Tillis in the U.S. Senate. You're a North Carolina guy. You went to UNC Chapel Hill. You Daily Tar Heel. Yeah, calm yourself. I'm just giving you the free
I know.
Tom Tillis, the U.S. Senator from North Carolina, has very quietly made himself important in the U.S. Senate.
Yes.
He did that by being pretty moderate and being kind of a guy that, he supports Trump, but he could work with other people. The Tom Tillis I've seen in the last 2 weeks is almost unrecognizable publicly to the Tom Tillis of the last 6-7 years. Is that a fair way to say it? Because I think he's shook. I think he knows that he's trying to fend off getting a Trump-backed primary challenger. And even if he doesn't, or he does and he survives it, he's got Roy Cooper, who's yet to lose an election in North Carolina of any type. I think he's shook, and I think it's showing in the way he's conducted these hearings. Is that too harsh? Because I think this is going to be this is one of those stories that give you a buoy to get through how these midterms are going to go. And that's an important one because that's a Trump state, but that's a Trump that states something, and you wrote about this already in The Independent. We'll link to it. The largest voting base in North Carolina is now unaffiliated voters. I is one. Yep. 40% of that base, they like Trump. They'll vote for Trump, but they're not lockstep in Trump on stuff, and they will go to Cooper if Tillis gets wobbly on stuff.
Yeah, they absolutely will go. And look, a lot of people voted for Josh Stein and Donald Trump because Mark Robinson, who Tillis did not like, broke the cardinal rule of North Carolina politics, which is don't do anything to embarrass the state. And Mark Robinson did plenty of things to embarrass North Carolina, not just himself. But you're absolutely right. Tillis, you have to take into account that Tillis, when he took power in 2010, when he became the state speaker of the House, and then when the governor took over in 2012, he was always considered the more moderate between him and a guy by the name of Phil Berger, who was the Senate president pro tempore. So he was, and not necessarily moderate, but he was the one who was seen as more agreeable because he represented Charlotte. He was someone who represented business. And one of the things that's been happening slowly but surely in North Carolina is that, and you and I know this, is that the North Carolina Republican Party is one of the best run, historically has been one of the best run parties in the country. It is a money-making machine. It is ruthlessly efficient at targeting voters, turning out voters, getting them to the polls. And I think that, and Tillis was a big part of that. And I think what's happened is that now the North Carolina Republican Party has become incredibly Trumpified. And his actions to nuke not just Mark Robinson, but Madison Cawthorn now have a lot of people, and his occasional breaks with Trump. Occasionally he said he didn't agree with using emergency powers to build the wall. His criticism of Trump after January 6th. Now his criticism of Trump pardoning the January 6th rioters. All of this stuff is stuff that's making conservatives willing to raise a little bit of hell. And I think that he's cognizant. So I'll give you an example. Not this past Friday, but the Friday before. Tillis was nowhere to be found throughout the Capitol. It was the day of the Hegseth vote. And it was just because he just didn't want to, he was probably thinking about it to the last minute. And then now we know from the Wall Street Journal that like he told Hegseth's ex-sister-in-law that if you sign an affidavit, I'll vote no. And then he went up voting yes. And then now you see him trying, if you saw his talk about RFK Jr., if you watched his questioning during the RFK's hearing in the Finance Committee, he was basically teeing up, trying to get RFK Jr. to give him an answer that's satisfactory so that he could vote to confirm him. And yeah, that'll probably help him survive a primary, especially because Robinson said this weekend that on Friday that he's not running again. But as you said, like if you go a little too far to the right in North Carolina, or if you go to, say nothing of going too far to the left in North Carolina, you risk people saying you're no longer doing things, you're no longer being an accurate representative of us. You're just a partisan. That was the mistake that John Edwards had when he was just seen as a pretty boy. And in the same respect, Tillis, he's a conservative, make no mistake. He's voted for the Trump tax cuts. He's voted for the judges. He's done all that. But because he's been somebody who could work with Kyrsten Sinema, he's somebody who could work with Chris Murphy on guns. He's someone who could work with the Biden administration on infrastructure. All of that stuff is now coming back to Biden, and things that used to be rewarded for a senator are no longer being rewarded. And another wrinkle, and you and I know this, Tillis has gotten lucky his last few elections. He's never, so in 2014 when he beat Kay Hagan, that was just a Republican wave. Obama's approval ratings were in the tank. People just didn't like Obama. There was Ebola. There was the rise of ISIS, all that. In 2020, when he ran for re-election, his opponent just couldn't keep it in his pants. And Biden just didn't campaign that much in North Carolina. They cut their losses and campaigned more in Georgia and the Rust Belt. This is going to be the first time Tillis has the wind in his face, and that is, and it would be rough for him, regardless of who his opponent is. But if he's running against someone like Roy Cooper, who is hands down for my money one of the best retail politicians I've seen campaign, it's going to be tough.
I think that bench, too, people don't realize North Carolina's congressional delegation right now has some real power players in it. They've got 4 or 5 Congress people that probably has the pull inside of D.C. to get the backing to make a Senate run if they really, really want it. It's just a matter if they want to give up their Congress power to do it. I mean, it's a list, man. You've got the Bishops and the Foxes and the Rousers. Like, there's a long list of congressional folks that might be eyeing that seat.
Yes.
As a primary challenger if he gets off the path, but that's another matter. One more thing on politics while I've got you, though, especially the North Carolina thing. North Carolina is one of those states. I just mentioned the stats. You wrote about it over the weekend when you were talking about Mark Robinson stepping off, who's one of the worst candidates I've ever seen in my lifetime. We'll link to all this, herdtell.substack.com, Eric M. Garcia on the Twitter and Blue Sky. When you were talking about North Carolina, people's like, oh, it's Trump, so it's not a swing state anymore. Yeah, it will be, because the demographics of it are moving rapidly. You have areas like Brunswick County outside of Wilmington, I think like the 3rd or 4th fastest growing county in the whole country. Nobody talks about
Union County.
Yeah, the Triangle is fastly growing, and it's not growing more Republican. The outer parts of the state are getting more and more Trumpian, places like Lumberton, where everybody's like, why is he going to Lumberton? Like, well, no, you got to understand how this stuff works. The demographics of a place like North Carolina is a good example of, it's Trump country, but post-Trump, that thing could change in a big, big hurry. You're from down here, you stay up to date on it. This is a very dynamic state, and I've had a home here on and off 20 years, give or take, splitting time between here and my beloved West Virginia. This is a dynamic state that can politically switch really, really quick based on current events, and something to watch not only in the midterms, but in the next presidential cycle. Because would it shock you if you ran a halfway decent Democratic candidate if they won in North Carolina? I don't think so.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't surprise me at all. And I should say that Kamala Harris, she ran, I talked with a lot of folks who worked on her North Carolina campaign. She got the right people. It was just the fact that she had to make up a deficit that Joe Biden had dug so deep in the hole. People were talking about Biden losing by like 5 or 6 points in North Carolina. But if you have a decent candidate, and if you have, if people have Trump fatigue, if the economy is not doing well, and you have a halfway decent turnout operation, and as you said, look, you've got a lot of, the benefit for Democrats is having a lot of those great universities down there, not just my beloved UNC, but also Duke, NC NC State, Wake Forest University, Catawba College, High Point University. You get a lot of high educated Yankees moving down there. You've got the Research Triangle, you've got the EPA down there. You've got a lot of jobs, and then also you've got the financial industry down in Charlotte. Union County is one of the biggest growing counties, and this is to say nothing of the Black Belt, which, I've joked for the longest time that the secret sauce for any state to become Democratic is you need a large influx of college-educated whites, you need a large, sizable chunk of Black voters, and you need a sizable chunk of young people, and people of color, though that's changing now because a lot of people of color voted for Trump. A lot of those parts are coming together in North Carolina for the Democrats. If they could just get their act together, and I think that the state Democratic Party actually did a pretty darn good job, all things considered, given how bad Joe Biden had put them in the hole, and the fact that Kamala Harris lost the state, it could very easily go the right way. These things aren't impossible until they aren't. The same thing happened, I should say, in the Rust Belt during the 2010s that filled the field to allow Trump to win the blue wall, which was considered unthinkable.
Yeah, running against Mark Robinson will help your political party tremendously because Josh Stein he may have won anyway, but he wasn't going to win by the landslide he did against the halfway decent because he's not the most charismatic guy. God bless him. I hope he does well as governor. All right, quick question here because you are the go-to guy for us on congressional matters. We're going to get fire hose with congressional news over the next 6-7 weeks. It's going to be a tsunami of stuff. Give us a little bit of a cheat sheet, top 2 or 3 things to pick out of the news cycle, because we're going to have the funding battle all at once. We're going to have these omnibus bills of Trump policies coming through. The confirmation hearings are going to be mostly wrapped up by the end of this week, at least the big heavy hitters, once we get Tulsi and RFK Jr. Out of the way. Give us a primer, 2 or 3 things to really watch for, because it's going to be too much information to keep up with, even if you want to. So between now and let's say the 1st of April, when this starts slowing down in the end of the 100 days, what's the things to watch for? Is it the debt limit? Is it the funding battle? Is it this? What should we watch for that you're paying attention to?
The one thing that you need to take into account is that, okay, so as I said, they did the continuing resolutions. They need to actually pass the 12 spending bills. The thing to take into account is that for the most part, you have, you and I call them the Clown Car Caucus, but they're formerly known as the House Freedom Caucus. Take a look at how many of these folks vote against the vote against the final omnibus spending bills, because those are because if you see enough of them, they're going to be the one, and Mike Johnson has to rely on the Democrats, which is what you and I know. He's had to do that as his whole time as speaker. That the number in that block is going to be the ones who determine whether or not these reconciliation bills I mentioned earlier are going to pass. Take a look and see how many of them also vote against the debt limit increase. If you look and you see which members of that block vote against the debt limit increase and the omnibus spending bills, that's going to be a good weather vane to see, can Trump strong-arm enough of these people? So Trump strong-armed enough people to get Mike Johnson as speaker, but can he strong-arm them enough on budget stuff, which Trump famously doesn't like doing omnibus spending bills, and he famously doesn't like raising and he famously tried to get the debt limit increase after he used to not like doing the debt limit increases. If there are enough of your Chip Roys, your Lauren Boeberts, your Thomas Massey's saying no to this stuff, then Trump's going to be in for a bumpy ride, not just from the Democrats, but from the Republicans.
One more thing, too, is you want to talk about how things have gotten upside down in Congress. Now we have the Democratic Party saying that they may hold up the debt ceiling as a negotiating tactic for the last, I don't know, since Newt, basically. That's been a Republican tactic.
Yeah, exactly.
Now they're looking at, it goes to what you were just saying. Johnson needs help from the Democrats on this stuff, on a lot of it. The Democrats know the midterms are coming, so their calculus has changed of, well, wait a minute, we can just run some interference, run the clock out, and then take our chances in an election that's probably going to go our way. That calculation is there for stuff like that. Do you think they actually pull the trigger on that, or do they think they get enough backing with the Trump chaos? Like, okay, we won't get dinged for obstructionism because people are going to want obstructionism. That's a pretty remarkable thing for them to be openly talking about.
It is, yeah, it is. We're definitely living in an opposite world now because, like you said, Republicans have typically done this. Democrats, they don't want an economic collapse, so they typically just are like, fine, we'll raise the debt limit. But now they're just like, they got a lot of cards. They got a lot of things that they maybe want. They maybe don't want the Trump tax cuts to expire. They maybe want some of the Trump tax cuts to expire. Maybe they want to bring back the child tax credit, which J.D. Vance says he likes. They got a few. They got a few cards up their sleeve. It's just a matter of whether or not they actually play them well. Democrats have been dealt a pretty few bad hands, but it's a big, to borrow from Kenny Rogers, every hand's a winner and every hand's a loser.
Well, one or the other's got to lose, unfortunately, although we don't cover it that way in the press. One more thing, a lot of this inside stuff, because I got you. Look, one of the most important things you can do is build up your own little cadre of who you follow in the media. Not to put you on the point, because I don't want you, thrown out of the lunchroom or anything, but government reporting is really hard to do, and there's very few people that do it. The people that do congressional reporting, like you, is a small group. It's even a smaller group that actually knows how, like, the FDIC runs, how GSA runs, how the GMO works. That's a small group of government reporters. Give folks a couple people they can follow on the real nitty gritty of this stuff, especially with the Elon stuff where they're going through the federal budget and this sort of thing. Not very many people cover that. Very few people cover well. Give people a couple people they can add to their social media feed to get that information directly.
Ellen Nakashima at the Washington Post has done a great job of covering the federal bureaucracy and the OPM stuff. Michelle Hackman is really great over at the Wall Street Journal, is actually fantastic when it comes to covering Homeland Security. Faiz Siddiqui is great at covering the intersection between tech and the government. The Financial Times as a whole has just stellar work. Again, it's a business outlet, so of course, the people who run the world actually need to know what's going on in Washington. So yeah, there's some great people out there, and those are the people who I check on my feed regularly. And Jeff Stein over the Washington Post. But then the entire diplomatic team over at the New York Times is incredible. The reporters, our reporters, our legal reporter Alex Woodward at the Independent is great when it comes to looking at all the executive orders. And to put her on blast, there are two really great young reporters on our team at the Independent: Ariana Bayo, Katie Hawkinson, and Kelly Risman. I guess that's three. All three of them have been incredible at covering Trump's executive orders and what they mean and how they affect your daily life.
All right, most important question I'll ask you, Eric Garcia, congressional reporter. Have you met Baby Dog yet?
I have met Baby Dog, and I met Baby Dog like last week. And for those who don't know, like, it's actually such an incredible deflection tactic that you didn't
believe me, did you, until you physically experienced it, did you? I've been telling you for years, buddy.
Yeah, I did not believe it, but like basically he's having Baby Dog paraded around, seeing the entire Capitol Press Corps pull out their phones and take photos of Baby Dog. We didn't even bother to ask Big Jim a question. Now
you figured it out. And I've been telling you this for years, my friend. I'm like, this is the greatest political thing ever. And you're like, okay, whatever. But now you've experienced it, haven't you? Hey, we're joking about it.
Yes.
This is a thing because the people that do this for a living literally forgot their professional bearing because it's a dog.
Yeah, exactly. It's a dog. It's a very adorable English bulldog that is literally too big to walk. So,
and you now have a U.S. senator that doesn't have to answer any legit questions because it's, by the way, have you seen my dog? And people think I've been making this up, but like, no. This is a thing. Like, I've got pictures of him up yonder when they did the state park right beside the house up yonder, right? I've got pictures of him with my daughter, everything, because they put our family in the second row because it's our family land that they have taken now for the third time. But I'm not bitter. We'll talk about this some other time. Jim Justice is very affable, and he has that Baby Dog, and he plays it up, and the press just eats it up.
It does. They do. Absolutely, they do. And it's like, and it wasn't until, and like, I remember I forgot my question that I was going to ask Big Jim. Whereas the day before, Big Jim didn't have baby dog, and I got it, and I asked him a question, and then he said, "I think we should just let President Trump have whoever he wants." And it's like, it was like, and then I just think about it, it was night and day when he has the dog versus when he doesn't have the dog.
Brad McElhaney, the excellent reporter for West Virginia Metro News, he holds the record for Jim Justice right now as getting dubbed the Vile. So we've been calling him Brad the Vile McElhaney, which was outrageous and uncalled for, but we're joking about. So if you can get a good nickname like the Vile at a big gym, I think you could put it on the CV, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Eric Garcia, he's got a book out on autism. We will link to it as we always does. Highly recommended. Mother Donaldson approved, who was a career special education teacher.
So
she liked it, really appreciated, like the chapter on Marshall and West Virginia in there. Does great work at the Independent. We've referred to about 4 different pieces he's wrote. We'll put all that in the Substack notes. Buddy, let people know where they can follow you, because you're gonna be a busy boy the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, no, you can follow me on Twitter/X, whatever the hell Elon's calling it, at Eric M. Garcia. Same handle on Blue Sky, Eric M. Garcia, bluesky.social. If any government workers want to speak to me on background, deep background, my signal is 909-957-6133. Thank you.
Yeah, and people that, I don't want to put myself out of any talking head gigs, but I'm repeating a lot of stuff Eric tells me on background, so you might want to book him, just saying.
Yeah.
Throw you a free plug, buddy. Eric Garcia, you're the best. Appreciate you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.
At Kroger, an annual Boost membership just got even better. Now you can choose from Disney Plus with ads, Hulu with ads, or ESPN Plus on us when you sign up. Plus, enjoy unlimited free delivery, double fuel points, exclusive offers, and free items. Sign up for a Boost membership today. It's an easier way to save, including new streaming options to relax with while we deliver your groceries. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Restrictions apply. See site for details.